Hi, my name is Kendall Newton, and I want to start off my video with the disclaimer that I'm aware that this is pretty much the least professional setting that I could record this video, but unfortunately, I had a really stressful week, and because of this, my blood pressure was high, and I'm 3 weeks from having a baby, so my doctor has chained me to this bed and told me I'm not allowed to move. So, we are going to work with what we've got, but we're going to have a good lesson. So, Um, the title of this lesson is Working with Rough Drafts, a Demonstration. When we're teaching writing to students, it's so important to impress upon them the importance of the rough draft. A lot of students are just so scared of that word rough draft. They take it as, oh my goodness, I have to write this paper twice. You're assigning me a 20-page paper and now I've got to do it 2 times, and it freaks them out. So, explaining the difference between a rough draft and a final draft to our students is very important. A rough draft, I agree with the students that a rough draft should be written as a final draft. You should give it your all every time. However, it should always be considered a work in progress, as we can always improve upon something. I'm pretty sure that somebody could take one of the great books, Pride and Prejudice, One Piece, and they can find something to change. There's always room for editing in anything that we do, so there's no reason to get discouraged because you're being asked to change something. And it's really important to make sure our students know that. Rough drafts are a wonderful opportunity to get those ideas down on paper because you're working with so many ideas and you've got, all this that you've got to get down into this paper. And sometimes it's easy to get jumbled. A lot of people are writers that like to do everything all in one night. I'm terrible about that. I procrastinate like crazy. And when I start writing, I can't stop because then I won't want to revisit it. So I will put off a 20-page paper until the last day, and then I'll try to write it all at one time. The problem with this is you get tired, and there's run-on sentences, and you're being repetitive, and common little things. You misspell words like the word sentence. I misspell sentence all the time. I don't get it. But if you write your paper all at one time, or even if you don't, it's really important to revisit this paper at a later time. So I recommend students go back the second day. And that's a good tip to teach our students, is that if you go back the second day, you're looking at it with fresh eyes, you've had a chance to sleep on that paper, and you're going to catch mistakes that you didn't realize you made. I've had students ask me, okay, well, where do I start? Where do I start editing this paper? And it can be an overwhelming and daunting task because, sometimes they're working with 10, 20 pages, and where do they start? I always say the same thing. Start by rereading your paper and reread it out loud. Take note of the sentences and paragraphs that don't flow smoothly or sound correct. When you're saying something out loud, sometimes the diction of your voice can catch mistakes that might look like they make sense on paper, but then when you're hearing them back, you're like, oh my goodness, what does that even mean? It doesn't make any sense. So reread it out loud. Before making any changes to a digital copy of a paper, I like to print out a paper, and I use the editing symbols, and I go in there with a red pen, and I mark it up. And there's several reasons I do this. One, it seems to me that it's easier to catch mistakes when you're holding something physically in your hand. The other reason I do this is that if you're working with lots and lots of pages, a lot of times when you're doing that on a computer, you might delete a word or something gets substituted, or an extra letter gets added in, and there's so much more room for mistakes. But if you print it out, you can do it page by page, and then you can go back to your digital copy and edit it page by page after you found all the mistakes. And it just seems to work better that way. A good way to find mistakes when you don't want to ask when you know the student doesn't want to ask their teacher, is that I encourage my students to help each other. Peer review is a good way to gain perspective on a paper. So encourage your students to go to their peers, because they're all in the same boat. They're all working on the same paper, and none of them want to do it. So they can whine to each other about the paper, and they can work on it together. And it's a great way to get a second set of eyes without your students having to come to you. The book, The St. Martin's Guide to Teaching Writing, they say that peer response groups allow writers to have control over their work, but it gives them the benefit of several readers' responses. That's so true. They can have other people look at it, but they're not losing that control that they want. I like to tell my students to use the rough draft checklist, which we're going to go over in just a minute, to mark their mistakes, and then they don't miss a category. So a big thing I would recommend that every writing teacher have in their classroom is a copy of the rough draft checklist. And I would write it out and have it on my board, as well as the common editing symbols. If these things become commonplace, then it's gonna come to students naturally. So I like to take time to make these in class, and make these and hang them in the classroom. So before we get to the rough draft checklist, I do want to say I would urge that the students utilize the university's writing lab as a guide between their rough and their final draft, because these people are amazing. There's things that I, as a teacher, write, they catch it, and I'm sitting there going, goodness gracious, I didn't realize that didn't make sense until you said that, but now I do. So make the students use that, because it's so helpful. So what is this rough draft checklist I keep talking about? It starts with proofread. This is number 1. You carefully check the writing for any kind of errors. Then step 2. Carefully make sure that all of the sentences begin and end in different ways. You're looking for sentence variety. Number 3, set a tone. Use words and phrases that set a tone or a mood for the paper. Make sure that the paper makes you feel a certain way. Clarity. Go back and check that all the sentences are clear and that they make sense. This one is so important to me. Descriptive details. Make sure that the details are clear enough to be pictured as if the reader were watching a movie. I know when I was a child, I really liked the Harry Potter books. And when I found out that they were making a movie, I was really scared, because I had these characters built up in my mind based on the author's descriptions. And I was pleased with, how the characters turned out. It was exactly how I pictured them. But you want people to get that feeling when they read your writing. So I like to tell my students to make sure that they're using enough descriptive words that they can picture what they're saying. Word choice. Go back and make sure that all of the vocabulary is used is mature vocabulary. Replace the baby words. A good way to do that is wait until you're done with the paper, go back and utilize that synonym button on your Microsoft Word. You could use a regular thesaurus, but using the synonym button is easier for me because then I don't have to type the words. Sequence. Check that all of the details are in the proper order and that they flow well together. You don't want to get out of order. If you're writing a paper, describing how to bake a cake, you don't want to be talking about baking the cake and then icing the cake and then go back to stirring the cake. You want to do it all in order so that it makes sense. You need to make sure all the details are consistent. All details used in the paper need to match the main idea of the paragraph that they're used in. So again, if you're talking about cracking the eggs for baking the cake, don't randomly start talking about icing the cake. It all needs to be clear. It's also important as teachers that we know how to encourage our students setting out in converting these papers into final drafts. It's important to guide your student through the editing process and not leave them hanging. One thing I like to do is I like to pick a couple of papers at random and I'll put it up on the smartboard and we will edit the paper together. And I will call on students in the classroom and I will ask for suggestions. So I'll have, especially if there's a blatant mistake. And sometimes I go in and make mistakes that weren't even there before, like an indentation or a non-capitalized first letter of a sentence. Something that is blatantly obvious to anybody over second grade. And I use it as an icebreaker. And doing this, they get more comfortable with editing and they know what your expectations are before they have to go in and make changes themselves. And it's so important that our students know what we expect of them because it helps them to be more sure of themselves. Dr. Richard Beach stated in an article published for the University of Minnesota that one reason that students often do not engage in substantive revising of rough drafts is that teachers generally assess only the final drafts. So let them know that sometimes we're looking at these rough drafts and we want to see the difference between the rough draft and the final draft. So every once in a while require that they show you both, and then you can see how they're growing as writers through the year. It's important that we are encouraging and use constructive criticism rather than just being harsh or degrading. It's easy as a teacher to sit there and go, oh my goodness, what were you thinking? This doesn't even make sense. And then you don't realize that you're really crushing your students because they put their all into these papers. In that, so you don't want to be nitpicky when editing. Allow the student's personality to shine through. A great way to tell a lot about your students or to learn, who your students are is through editing. Is through reading their first paper. And we don't want to go back and have them change too much so that they lose the self-confidence that they've gained. It's important to make alternatives other than just marking mistakes. If a student seems to have problems in a specific area, offer advice. Don't just say, red pen, red pen, red pen, and you see all this, and then they say, okay, I have to edit it, and I don't know how. So you want to be sure you're saying, okay, look, I noticed that you have a lot of problems with the Oxford comma or hanging indent, and then you offer a solution. You say, okay, I would recommend you go work with a writing tutor, and I really think it'll help. Doing this will help students to see a light at the end of the tunnel. So most importantly, just while we're working with these students who are learning to edit papers, is that we stay encouraging and we keep our expectations even so that they know what we expect. So anyway, I hope you appreciated the lesson today, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you.